Horror is a genre with which so many things are explored. Back in the 60s and 70s, horror loved to explore the undead and what our mortality means to us. In the 80s and 90s, horror became flashy and hyperbolic.
You were the only one that could have got to that blood. We'll do you last. Get away from me! Retreating! What is it?
In modern day, horror is used as a metaphor.
I am your mother. Do you understand? All I do is worry and slave and defend you. And all I get back is that on your face. So full of disdain and resentment and always so annoyed.
Instead of simply exploring basic concepts of fear, horror today is more psychological than it's ever been. Of course, there have been pieces which have been explored like this before, but now more than ever, horror is used as a catalyst to explore mental illness, family issues, loneliness, and more abstract concepts. With directors like Ari Aster, Mike Flanagan, etc., horror has managed to slither its way into the public consciousness even more than it already has. Having grown up on the internet as a naive 2000s baby, I was so fond of these little films. The low resolution trailers would play on my old, worrying Windows 98 computer, and I would sit in sheer terror, my fingers covering my eyes, peeking through the cracks. I remember watching little clips of movies like Rosemary's Baby, Black Christmas, and other things way too hardcore for a girl my age. And this is also the time when I found out about horror games. Things like Resident Evil, Alone in the Dark, Fatal Frame, and a plethora of others. I couldn't peel my eyes away from the screen when I would boot up my PlayStation 2 emulator, completely swallowed up by the nightmare fuel in front of me. There was one game in particular, however, that stuck with me for months. No, years to come. Its imagery was burned into the back of my head like a nasty scar. That game is Silent Hill 2.
Maria?
You said you took everything, but you forgot that videotape we made. I wonder if it's still there.
How do you know about that? Aren't you Maria?
Silent Hill is a horror video game series spawned by Keiichiro Toyama, Masahiro Ito, and Hiroyuki Iwaku, with music by Akira Yamaoka. Silent Hill is often cited as one of the pioneers of classic survival horror, popularizing the genre to AAA status. The first game in the series follows protective father Harry Mason, who is looking for his daughter Cheryl. The game was heavily praised by critics for its clever use of psychological horror tactics and its unique plot. In this video, however, I'll mostly be talking about Silent Hill 2, the darling of the series. To better understand the meaning of the game and the points I'll address later in the video, I'm going to summarize the plot with you. Skip here if you want to avoid the boring bits and get to the meat of the video, and by the way, if you haven't played Silent Hill 2, then I heavily implore you to do so. It's one of the best, most crown jewels in psychological terror that I've ever seen in my entire life, but let's dive into the summary. James Sunderland, a young man, comes to Silent Hill after apparently receiving his letter from his wife, Mary, who died of an illness 3 years prior. On his way to get to the town, he encounters Angela Orozco, a teenage runaway looking for her mother. She seems a bit jumpy at first glance.
Excuse me,
Oh, I'm sorry. I
No,
was
it's
just...
okay. I didn't mean to scare you.
Eddie Dombrowski, another teenage runaway, seems a little frantic, but well-mannered when James first meets him. Finally, he also meets a young girl named Laura, an 8-year-old who apparently befriended his wife and accused James of not truly loving her. After these encounters, James searches a local park where he meets this woman named Maria, who strongly resembles his late wife.
Not.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
No, my late wife. I can't believe it. You could be her twin. Your face, your voice, just your hair and clothes are different.
My name is Maria. I don't look like a ghost, do I?
However, she's wearing a lot different clothes, and her hair is bleached blonde. Maria says to James that she's never met Mary. She's never even heard of her. Because of the fact that Mary is frightened by the monsters in the town, James allows her to follow him. Oh, that's right. I forgot to mention. There are monsters. After James and Maria follow Laura to a hospital and search for her, they're stalked by the monster named Pyramid Head, and Maria is killed while James escapes.
Open up!
After this traumatic experience, James resolves to search the hotel that he and Mary stayed in prior to her death. On the way, James finds Maria in a prison cell, by herself, alive and well. She apparently doesn't realize that she's been killed mere moments earlier, and she discusses things in James's past which only he and Mary would know. After James allows her to ramble on and promises her that he'll find her and let her escape, he comes back with the key to her cell, only to find her dead once more. Later on in his journey, James finds Angela and kills a monster that's been harassing her. She confesses that her father, who apparently she's been seeing this entire time in the town, has sexually abused her. A newspaper clipping implies that she killed him in self-defense before coming to Silent Hill. James also confronts Eddie, and Eddie admits to killing a bully and a dog before fleeing to Silent Hill. Eddie attacks him, crazed by the fact that James has found out about his secrets, and James has to put him down in self-defense. When James arrives at a hotel, the one that Mary and him stayed at, he locates a videotape which depicts him killing his wife. And Mary's letter to him, the one that sent him to Silent Hill, becomes a blank piece of paper. After all this time, James realizes that his illness was his own and not his wife's. James realizes that an illness wasn't the thing that killed his wife. It was him. After meeting up with Angela one last time and watching her walk into a funeral pyre, never to be seen again, James encounters two Pyramid Heads, along with Maria, who's murdered for a third time. James finally realizes that the town, the Pyramid Heads, are all an illusion meant to punish him for what he's done, the things he's done to his wife. After getting to the hotel rooftop, James finds Mary and kills her again. The game has multiple different endings, but the one that most people consider canon is the leave ending. James meets with Mary, reads her letter, and speaks with her. He then leaves the town with Laura, ending the whole nightmarish experience. At first glance, the plot of Silent Hill 2 seems a little disjointed and confusing. The characters sound so uncanny. The town is never explained, and there are millions of minute details that you'd blink and miss. But this game has this dreamlike quality that melts the scenes together. Dialogue feels like it's happening outside of the context of certain scenes, and the music Yamaoka creates sets the atmosphere to a droning, sorrowful endeavor. James, although an extreme version of this, is a representation of us, the player. Throughout his journey, he comes to understand himself, his repression, the things that hurt him, and we as the audience see his transformation the same way that he does. The monsters don't just represent something that goes bump in the night. Each monster, each thing lurking in the darkness, represents James' trauma and damage. All of the lesser monsters, the mannequin, the nurses, the lying figures, are strangely sexualized in nature, and this is meant to represent James's sexual repression due to his wife's illness. In her final days, James hated Mary. He was mad at her for blowing up at him, mad that she didn't appreciate his efforts to make her happy. So, in a fit of rage, and finally at his breaking point, he snapped. Anybody in the real world would see this story and have an understanding of what James was going through. Yes, even though he's a monster himself for taking out his anger on his wife, the player can't help but sympathize with his emotions, in a way, his sadness. By the way, skip to this point if you don't want to hear about trauma, traumatic events, self-harm, depression, anxiety, all that stuff. We've already been through a bunch of things in this video, so it's not going to be very surprising, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay. I have dealt with traumatic experiences my entire life, up from the point when I was in elementary school all the way up until now. I've dealt with depression, anxiety, and self-harm, and I was plagued with self-image issues for years. Because of all of this, I became a recluse, hiding my nose into games and staying put. I wanted to feel seen. I wanted to feel okay. I've spent many years coping with things that have happened in my life through therapy and medication, the same way I'm sure many of you have as well. When we see these kinds of emotions, this manifestation of crushing, oppressive loneliness represented in media, we feel a little less alone. When I first played this game way back then, I was astonished by its story and presentation, but now, more than ever, I relate to its themes and atmosphere. I see the fog, the creatures, the slimy dark halls, and the rust, and I feel at home. Silent Hill 2 is a game about pain. It's a game about love and suffering, the way depression holds us back, the way that we lie to ourselves to relieve the guilt on our shoulders. In some way, we can relate to the monsters in this foggy little town. Angela is a troubled teen, distraught by her father's abuse of her, so much that she's willing to walk into an actual burning fire to end her suffering. Eddie is a manic individual who was bullied until he snapped, and even if we can't relate to the whole murderous psychopath thing, a part of our hearts sting for him because we've all been bullied at least a little bit. And finally, James. James. He's depressed over the loss of his wife, something many of us can relate to, and he takes to self destructive means to cope. He doesn't care about living anymore, and Silent Hill knows that and takes advantage of him. I think that exploring ourselves in video games is important. The way we act, think, feel, and understand one another as well as our pasts. Any of us could stumble, fall into a deep hole we can barely escape from. It's media like Silent Hill 2 that reminds us that we can be hurt. We can be damaged and still be okay. Back when it was released, Silent Hill 2 was praised for its sensitive tackling of hard subjects. But now, more than ever, now that mental health has become mainstream, its themes of suffering and loss have become more relevant than they ever have. We all have that darkness lingering inside our souls, waiting to lash out at us for ignoring it. It's only in our dreams where this darkness, this sadness, can take form on trembling legs and attack us.